So for English 3, our first unit is called Dreaming the American Dream. So throughout this unit, we're going to be reading a lot of different accounts, and they're going to span over different historical periods, but it's going to be important for us to understand who's writing them, from what perspective they're told, and then what details are used in those accounts. So our unit vocabulary is going to help us understand those things. So our first term is a primary source. So a primary source is something that is written firsthand, so that means that the person who is involved is the one writing it. It contains original information created during the period of study. So if I was writing something about a day in the life at MCHP, I would not write it from a 1950s perspective, because that is not in the period of study that we are in, and I wasn't around at that point in order to make it a first-hand account. So it has to be within that time period, and it has to be from the person's perspective who's telling the story. These kinds of documents could be things like letters, different pieces of literature, so it could be some sort of story. It could be an interview. An interview is going to be a primary source because it's going to be the person involved with another person who's asking questions. So that's still primary because it's happening within that period of study. And it could be any other historical document. So that could be something like an article from a previous newspaper. It could be something like a court document, some sort of transcript, because that would have the people involved helping in the creation of that source. So primary sources are original, they're firsthand, and they're within the context of time that they're reporting on. You can also have secondary sources. Secondary sources are sources that report on, interpret, or analyze primary sources. So usually if I ask you today to read an article and then write something about it, you are generating a secondary source because you're taking a primary source that someone wrote and then you're reporting on it. So to report on something means that you are telling the details from that reading, so the important pieces of information. To interpret it means that you're taking the things that are difficult to understand and putting it into some different language. And then to analyze it means that you are applying whatever concept or problem in there to today's current issues, okay? So things that are secondary sources are news stories. Every night on the 6 o'clock news, someone else has done the primary report where they've been on scene and they're reporting, but then a newscaster may read the report, the secondary source, from a piece of paper. And then reviews. If you do some sort of review on an event, that would be you retelling what happened, but maybe you weren't actually there. So that's what makes it the secondary piece. Primary is first, secondary is second. The things that support these kinds of sources are narrative details and descriptive details, So a narrative detail, narrative just means that you're telling a story. So narrative details are details that provide information about events and actions. You all probably know those people who tell the stories that take 20 minutes when it really could have taken 2 minutes because they tell you so much extra stuff, but not a lot of stuff that's actually happening, okay? So your narrative details are important when you're reporting either a primary or a secondary source because it's going to tell us the events that are happening, so things that are actually taking place, and the actions. So it may be some sort of parade is the event, but a kid getting punched in the face was part of the action, right? So you need to make sure that you're including those narrative details at the right times in the sources, or that if you're reading, that you're understanding that these are the actions and these are the events that make this primary or secondary source important. And so again, I put down here that just helps us understand what is happening in that source. All right, so those are your secondary source and your narrative details. And then the last thing we're going to look at for this unit are your descriptive details. Now these are details that describe a person or setting. So basically anything that you would need to describe so that I could visualize the setting or the person involved. So if you think about someone telling a story and you want to know what the person was wearing, what the building was like, maybe sort of what was happening that day. Was it sunny? Was it bright? anything that's going to allow the reader to get a feel for what the author is telling us. So instead of just telling us, you're sort of showing us as readers and walking us through that. So the descriptive details really make it a more personalized account. So if we're reading about a fight, right, or a battle, we're going to want to know what the emotions were of that day. We may want to know what the sounds were of that day, and we want to see it as we're reading it. We want to know what it looks like. The descriptive details really take it off of the paper and helps the people involved relive or imagine what was happening.